citizens' confidence in the process is something that we ought to take a look at and not be fooled by the shallow, rhetoric that's out there right now.
Well, you know what, I'm going to, unless you have something, Christian, I'm going to open up the floor to questions and comments. I don't know, do you have a microphone for the audience members? Okay, well, if you speak up so at least I can hear you, I will repeat your question or comment if you could identify yourself as well. Yes, right front.
How difficult is it to get illegals registered to vote, or at least get them to the polls to vote, and get them voting?
Okay, the question is how difficult is it to get illegal aliens registered and voting? And I guess I would apply also to aliens as well, I might add, who are here illegally.
Go ahead. Couple of things I'd suggest you look into. Utah did a legislative audit report, I want to say about 2005, 2006, that cataloged illegal alien presence on the voter rolls in Utah in the hundreds that participated in elections. The Utah Legislative Council is like an IG, an investigative body that went through the rolls and cross-referenced with ICE records, participation in Utah elections. There's data there. New Mexico might have had a problem. Colorado might have had a problem. We know Houston, Harris County, I've held in my hands the voter registration forms of people who claim they're not U.S. citizens registered to vote. Now, this is exacerbated. I'm not saying this justifies not having a law, but Motor Voter exacerbates this because people who are green card holders who go to get a driver's license are asked, do you want to register to vote?
Right.
And in their defense, some of them say, well, heck, if this government official is asking me if I want to register to vote, maybe I'm allowed.
Right.
And so they don't necessarily knowingly add their name to the rolls. So that's part of the problem. There's many other and documented instances of illegals actually casting a vote, or resident aliens. You can go to my blog. I think I've posted a couple stories about those convictions in the last year.
First, I don't think the biggest problem we have is illegal alien voting, simply because illegal aliens tend to have a habit of not wanting to associate with government officials and government processes for obvious reasons. Having said that, it doesn't take many in a close election to swing a result. We have evidence in Washington State governor's race in 2004, the Minnesota Senate race in 2008. The elections were so close, you can probably say that any number of categories of people who voted probably swung the election. There were enough felons in Minnesota, to have swung the election. There probably were enough illegal aliens in Washington State. Here's the rub. Government is supposed to be more and more transparent. There's a president who ran on transparency. We're supposed to have openness in government, sunshine laws. In Washington State, citizens groups similar to what Catherine runs sued to get access to what you think would be a public record, which is the letter that people are sent when they're asked to serve on juries. You have to answer the letter. You have to answer some questions. We know from Orange County, California, that there was a congressional race in which a whole bunch of people voted who had done two things. They had said, when they got their jury summons, that they were not citizens, but as Christian points out, they were registered to vote, and they voted. One of those two things is not true, and it means that they've committed a crime of some kind. They've either lied in one area or they've lied in the other area, or maybe both. We, in Washington State, the citizens group sued to simply say, we want the list of people who were sent jury notices and claimed they weren't citizens. Some of those people voted, we know that, but they didn't know how many. They were denied, and they lost in court. This is outrageous. These people were summoned for jury duty, and we have a right to know whether or not they claimed they weren't citizens in order to try to avoid jury duty or simply because they were reporting honestly. So I think that there's an active effort on the part of some election administrators and some people in charge of the system to make it very difficult for us to figure out how much voter fraud there is. So they always say there's no voter fraud. Well, open up the books, let's see.
Let me add something really important to that question, if I could. Number one, a lot of places it's legal for non-citizens to vote in local elections. If any of you live in Maryland, have fun, because non-citizens participate in elections, in local elections in places like Montgomery County and Silver Spring. Number two, Justice Department, Georgia citizenship verification. Georgia passed a law that required people registering to vote to prove they were eligible U.S. citizens to vote, and this Justice Department objected to it under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act in 2009, brought on by the complaints of MALDEF and Elise Shore, and MALDEF, who now no longer works for MALDEF, she now works at the Justice Department in the voting section. Okay? So that's number two. The third thing, the Justice Department filed a brief in a case in Texas called the City of Irving, Texas. The Justice Department, Eric Holder's position is that illegal aliens and non-citizens should be counted for redistricting purposes, essentially giving political power to non-citizens, counting them as people who should be counted, and diluting the districts of citizens. And they filed this in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals a couple of months ago. The case is called the City of Irving.
Catherine, what's your perspective? Were the numbers, the documents that you examined close up, were you surprised by the numbers? Was it a number that, well, there's always going to be a number of accidental registrations,
right?
That's to put it charitably.
Right.
What struck you about what you found?
I think I would agree with the way John characterized it. I didn't perceive, certainly not from the research that we've done, nor from what I can gather across the country, that that's the biggest issue that our system faces. But I do think it points to a generalized weakness in our system, and that is that our election processes are largely dependent upon honor. We trust that our deputy voter registrars or our counties are not going to willfully, knowingly register illegal aliens. We trust that their identifications will be checked at the polls. There's a lot of trust built into this, as it should be, right up until the point when there is undeniable, systemic, apparently, subversion of the process, which then calls everything into question. So, yeah, we did see certainly enough, but as Christian, got one of my favorite lines: how much fraud's okay? How much fraud should we be good with? Because if it's a problem now, it is a much bigger problem just waiting to happen.
Are there any other questions or comments? Chris?
I get the impression that there are some who wish to steal elections and others who wish to break the electoral system. Can you give a couple of examples or a few names of those who are particularly expert at either stealing an election or breaking the electoral process?
So for the listeners on the web, the question was, there are groups who want to steal elections, and then there are groups who want to, I guess, break elections and upend the system.
With a question that involves the title to John's book, Stealing Elections, I think we should defer to John on that one.
Well, ACORN was a little bit of both. ACORN was modeled after a famous essay from the social scientists Francis Fox Pittman and Richard Ploward, in which in the 1960s they advocated that people flood the welfare rolls in order to bankrupt the system, and in the ensuing chaos there would be a revolution. ACORN's model clearly was completely indifferent to the accuracy or integrity of elections. So on the voter registration front, I think they wanted to flood the system and create chaos. In that chaos, it would be easier for others or people they were allied with to perhaps tilt the election through theft. Because the sloppier the voter registration rolls are, the easier it is to conceal other problems once you get closer to the actual voting. So there was method to their madness. Now, they weren't particularly good about it. I mean, they were very sloppy, actually. In fact, the internal joke at ACORN was that the left hand didn't know what their extreme left hand was doing half the time. But that was their intent. Their intent was to subvert the system and make it easier in the ensuing chaos for things to happen. Remember, if you're deciding to steal an election, you don't do it if it's a landslide. You only do it if it's close. So the closer you get to an election, you then decide, is it worth the effort to try to organize an attempt to steal an election? But if you've already, in state after state, salted the registration rolls with suspect or spurious registrations, it gives you the raw material with which you can more easily steal the election once you decide what your priorities are, once you decide where the election is close.
Well, you know, we had done an investigation of, I think it was in Connecticut, and the FBI went up there, they ended up doing nothing, even though it was egregious voter registration fraud. It was a decision by the FBI under the Obama administration, I guess with the U.S. Attorney up there. But I had followed up and called the Connecticut voting official to ask about what had happened. And we know this is true from other circumstances as well, is that they're in there working their darndest to make sure the rolls are correct just prior to the election. And then someone like Project Vote or ACORN, the one and the same, Project Vote usually gives the money to ACORN to get the voting canvassers out there to register voters. They come in and dump thousands and thousands of voter registrations.
On the last day.
On the last day, and it's mostly garbage. And so they get caught up in having to figure what's going on there. And what happens? If you're trying to get on the roll legally, and you're trying to make sure that your address has been changed so that you don't have problems voting, the voting official isn't able to get to that. And so it disrupts the system, so not only does it allow the opportunity for fraud, but it makes sure that people who want to vote legally have more difficulty doing so, and it makes the job of the officials ensure that we pay to make sure the integrity of our elections is protected at the local level. Most of these folks are, and I'm sure you voted, if you voted for any period of time, probably see the same people there, that time after election after election. And most of these folks at the local level are honorable people, but they get caught up in some of these massive national efforts, and their system is destroyed as a result.
And the more chaos there is on election day, the easier it is to slip things past them.
Sure.
Because if they're constantly confronted with more and more inaccuracies and problems, it'll make it harder to catch people who are trying to game the system and actually vote.
If you have 1,000 voters showing up without ID, and you all of a sudden have one precinct asking for 1,000 provisional ballots, you know, our systems aren't designed to handle that sort of mass. And I guarantee you what's happening now. You go to the Project Vote's website, which is still in operation. They're desperately trying to register Obama's food stamp army to overrun the rolls again in 2012. So don't think it's ended, as I said in my opening remarks, with the scandals of the last few years. These groups are very active, and they're using this the voter registration act, the federal law, to register folks off on the rolls in a way to benefit their political efforts.
And there's such a rich history here which we can't let pass. Tom mentioned in passing. Barack Obama knows all about these issues. When he taught at the University of Chicago Law School was voting rights. He's well aware of all these issues. His entire career is based on these issues. His first major political job in Chicago was head of Project Vote, the ACORN affiliate in Chicago. He did such a good job there, he moved on to become the top trainer in Chicago for ACORN. He did such a good job there that he became ACORN's lawyer, upholding the motor voter law that Christian referenced in his famous case in Illinois. That was the template for extending it nationwide. Barack Obama is marinated in ACORN. And he avoided at all costs any association or reporting with his ties to the organization in 2008. And we now know the extent to which he tried to evade, or his campaign tried to evade those ties. ACORN affiliates were paid $900,000 in the Democratic primaries in Ohio and Pennsylvania for get-out-the-vote efforts and voter registration efforts. But their role was concealed in Federal Election Commission reporting because it was said that the groups were being paid for staging and lighting and other things, making it as if they were accompaniments to a rock band or something. But that was ACORN and its many affiliates. So the Obama administration, they know what ACORN has been up to over the years, and they willfully choose to ignore it, look the other way.
Well, Christian and Catherine, we're gonna have to wrap up, but I want to give you some, a chance to make any final comments or recommendations of what we can expect. Catherine, please.
Okay, well, I think that where we are as a country right now, certainly more so than any time in my life, we can say that citizens are aware and awake. Our elections are a place where citizens can make a real difference, where you can roll up your sleeves and put on your waders and get involved. And so as you look sometimes with great frustration about some of the elements of our government that feel like they're beyond our control, working in your elections is a place where you can have an impact, you can make a difference, you can support a process which goes on to in turn support stronger processes all the way up the food chain. But the counter to that is true as well. If we allow corruption at the most fundamental level of our government, at the polls, it will rise unchecked to the highest levels of office. And if we as a country find ourselves at a place where we, with a wink and a nod say, well, maybe it's not enough fraud to worry about, I know I'm going to get sued if I ask the question, so I'm just not going to ask the question. What have we become? That's not who our forefathers were. That's not what this country is based on. And so it's an opportunity. There are problems, but it is up to us to step in and get involved to solve them in constructive ways for the benefit of all people, irrespective of party. It's not about party, it's about principle. And True to Vote is an effort to do just that, an effort to engage citizens. Please stay aware, though, because there are groups, and as much as I wish it weren't true, there are groups who would look to crack the system.
Thank you, Catherine. Christian?
I always love predictions because people that nobody reads can say you got it wrong. So I'll give you two. One, the Justice Department will object to South Carolina's voter ID law shortly. For reasons that are dumbfounding to anyone who follows this, South Carolina submitted their voter ID law to justice as opposed to going to federal court, as Florida, as Virginia, as Louisiana, as Texas, and on have done in the last year to bypass Eric Holder's proclivities. That's the first one. So we'll object to South Carolina voter ID. And secondly, between now and the election, the DOJ will do some feint to make it appear that they care about the things we're talking about here, to get everyone off their back, but in reality, it will be just that, a small effort. Maybe they'll reply to the letter that True the Vote sent them last October. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, John, when is your edited new book going to be available?
Summer next year.
Summer next year. In the meantime, you're on Fox and American Spectator and everywhere else you write. And Christian, when's your book scheduled to be published?
October 4th. Amazon, Barnes & Noble now.
True the Vote is on. You can pre-order it, right?
Yes.
Yes. And Catherine, True the Vote is on the internet, I presume?
Absolutely. You can go and get involved right now. I'm assuming we can use Judicial Watch internet access to sign up right now. For truethevote.org, we are working with states across the nation to help mobilize and make sure that there's no polling place left unmanned. We can all do this.
Well, what strikes me from this conversation, and as Christian intimated, Judicial Watch, obviously we've been investigating this for some time, but we'll be taking more direct action on these issues. But it is going to be up to activist groups and citizens to take this on. The laws provide opportunities for that. You have rights as citizens to monitor the polls and to hold your local officials to account. And what's wonderful about this topic is this is not happening in Washington. The elections happen at your local level. And for a dog catcher on up, and don't be shy about figuring out what's up and what's going on there, and who's up and who's down, and how it works. Because this is a unique opportunity for individual citizens to have a dramatic impact. And just one noisy, insistent person can make the bureaucrats charged with making sure our elections are well run. Pay attention, so do not be shy.
I would be remiss if I didn't point out that we have another author of another book on these topics in the room, Matthew Vadum from the Capital Research Center. And remind us what the title of your book is?
Subversion, Inc., How Obama's ACORN Red Shirts are still terrorizing and ripping off American
Well,
taxpayers.
let's just say I'll call it Subversion, available at popular bookstores and Amazon.com. But it's an excellent, it's the single best recounting of the ongoing ACORN saga. ACORN is damaged, but it is under new mismanagement, and it will not go away.
Well, thank you everyone for